Hi, I'm Jeff Edelman. I'm a personal injury attorney here in Coral Springs, Florida. Get a lot of questions throughout my day about other areas of the law besides personal injury. Some of the answers I can give real quick because when we go to law school, they don't say, okay, you do personal injury law, you do criminal law. We learn a little bit of everything, just enough to get us in trouble. Most of us pick a specialty and then we go into that. But when it gets a little bit deeper, I'll usually tell my clients, hey, you need to consult with a professional. And hang on one second, I'm trying to find this here. And I have several people that I use that I regularly refer to that I trust. One of those people is a longtime friend of mine back at the Nova Southeastern University Law School days, my dear friend Franklin Jara of Miami. Now, Frank is somebody that I've known for a long time. We were actually paired together our first year at law school, and he hasn't been able to shake me off ever since. So he does family law, and I thought it would be beneficial for my clients, his clients, and for the rest of you who either don't know us or have never had to consult with an attorney to know a little bit about the ins and outs of family law, and he can answer some of the some of the things that regularly come up. So we're trying to get him into the broadcast now, and for the first time with my friend Frank Jara.
Hey Jeff, what's
Frank,
going
how are
on?
you?
Can you hear me all right?
Oh, you sound delightful.
Awesome. I had to manufacture a stand here.
Okay, well that's good. That's good.
How's it going?
You know, something that they don't teach us in law school is about how to be innovative with things that go wrong that aren't law related, whether it be in trial, making sure that your things stand up, that you have enough room in the briefcase, that you have somebody to work the technology while you're
Maybe we
talking
should
to
teach a
the judge.
class.
Probably should, but
Useful things in law.
I think it's too practical, so I'm not sure that would be something that law schools would like. So,
Practicality. What's going on?
I know all the answers to these questions, but if you could, can you tell people watching, tell them a little bit about your practice?
Well, I primarily focus on family law. Have a family law practice. I also do some employment law and a little bit of commercial litigation, but my main focus is family law and family law related issues.
When you say family law related issues, can you explain to everybody what that encompasses, what that means?
Family law, pretty much anything from divorce to adoption, child custody, child support, time sharing, issues with co-parenting. There's a lot of things that family law can cover.
How did you get into this field?
I got into it because I was practicing with another family law firm, and they threw a few cases at me for family law, and the next thing you know, I was doing family law.
All right, now tell me, every state has different laws, and that includes family law. With regards to somebody who's going through a divorce, let's say that the wife has cheated on the husband and done it repeatedly.
Okay.
And the husband wants a divorce.
Okay.
Does that make a significant difference in the divorce proceeding, which is called dissolution of marriage?
I would say, to answer your question generally, that Florida is a no-fault state, first of all. So you can get a divorce, if you want a divorce for whatever reason. And whether a spouse acted incorrectly, poorly, immorally, it really is not going to have much of an effect. Now, where it could have an effect is, let's suppose, in your example, the wife cheated on him several times for a long period of time. Well, did they use any marital funds to take the boyfriend on a trip, to buy him a Rolex watch, to give them this grand life. If that's the case, then yeah, that could impact the equitable distribution of the parties when it comes to a divorce. But it doesn't necessarily take away any rights to a divorce or give anyone greater rights over the other person.
Does it matter how long a couple is married in terms of a divorce settlement or for a
Yes,
trial?
length of a marriage is taken into account for various reasons. It gets taken into account for alimony purposes, for one. So if you had a 10-year marriage, the judges, the courts may be less inclined to give a spouse, under certain circumstances, of course, everything depends, but less likely to give a spouse, spousal support, whereas a long-term marriage, 15 years plus or 20 years plus, there's a stronger likelihood, given circumstances of the case, that there may be alimony awarded to the spouse, to a spouse.
Okay, well, is there like a formula?
For alimony, there really isn't a formula. There's a formula for child support. The statute provides a formula that takes into account income and the amount of time spent with the children. But for alimony, you really have to look at more things than just a formula. You have to see the lifestyle, how are they living? What have they grown accustomed to? You know, has the wife stayed home? Has the husband stayed home? Who's, given most of the support? There's a lot of factors that you have to look into when you determine an alimony calculation. It's not just as simple as, 15 years times X amount of dollars, and that's what you get. There's other issues to be seen.
Well, let me ask you this, and again, I have some questions that people have sent me over the week in anticipation that you were going to be on here.
Okay.
If somebody files for divorce, does that negatively affect their parental rights?
Just the act of filing a dissolution of marriage does not, in and of itself, affect parental rights.
Okay,
I mean,
well,
it could affect your parental rights because obviously you're breaking up. You're probably going to be living in a different household. You're going to have to come up with a time sharing schedule. But it doesn't take away one parent's. Just because you filed, now you don't have less rights over your children, if that's the question.
well, and that brings up another question. If, for example, a father wants 50-50 custody of the children, does that mean he doesn't have to pay child support?
That's a very common question that I get a lot of times. That's a very popular question. Well, let's start with the first fact is that there's no longer custody in Florida. It's called equal time sharing. The parents, it's presumed that each party is going to start off with 50-50 time sharing unless you can demonstrate a reason why the other party shouldn't have 50-50 time sharing. Now, this 50-50 time sharing of not having to pay child support, it really has to work out mathematically. Now, let's give you an example of how this will work out. Let's say mom makes $50,000 a year, dad makes $50,000 a year, and they have a strict 50-50 time sharing. They're probably not going to pay child support. But if there's a disparity in income, let's say mom makes 100,000 and dad makes 50, there's probably going to be child support payments in that scenario, even if there's a 50-50 split.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this: if somebody leaves the house, I mean, the couple is going to be getting a divorce.
Okay.
One parent leaves the house. Is that considered abandonment?
No, there's no abandonment in Florida. Sometimes it is recommended for one party to leave the house because it could lead to issues within the family, domestic violence issues. So it is sometimes recommended that one of the parties leave, especially if there's going to be conflict or fights and things like that. But no, there's no abandonment. It's recommended that if you're in a bad situation, like a domestic violence situation, it's actually recommended that you do leave the house. Get yourself safe.
If somebody is in a domestic violence situation, do you have any recommendations to them as to resources available or steps that they can take to get themselves out of that situation?
There are many resources. The first resource I always tell my clients is if you're in that situation, is there family or friends that you can go to seek shelter, that you can be safe? And if there's nowhere to go, because sometimes people live away from their family, they're here because they moved, there is a number of shelters and and centers throughout Miami-Dade and Broward that can take in women of domestic violence. Not just women. I don't want to generalize. There's also men. So there are shelters and
Absolutely.
situations for both.
All right. Well, now, if a father gets timesharing granted, is it true that fathers only get timeshare granted every other weekend?
No, that's that's not necessarily the case anymore. I mean, parties could opt for a every other weekend schedule if that's what they feel comfortable with, but that's not the norm going right out of the gate. The norm out of the gate is that each parent has the right to 50% time sharing. So it's not automatically an every other weekend setup with a 50-50 time sharing. You could set it up that way if that's what the parties want. Is for some families, that's what's beneficial. That's what works best for them. And, a lot of times these time sharing schedules really have to be catered to the family. Maybe dad works nights and mom works mornings. So you really have to sometimes sit down with both sides. And this is difficult, especially when you're going through a divorce, to try to figure out a good schedule for both the children and the parents alike.
Right. Well, I'm sure the top question that you get, Frank, when somebody calls you is, what's this going to cost me? And I think that is a question that is a difficult one to answer. Can you tell us why?
I could tell you why, because there's a number of factors that sometimes come into play. Someone that, let's say, wants to get divorced and it's a short-term marriage, there's no assets, no children, it's gonna be relatively inexpensive for this couple to get divorced. But now let's say you're in a long-term marriage, you have your own business, there's retirement, there's savings accounts, there's property, there's children, then that can complicate situations. Let's take an example of someone who owns their own businesses and is going through divorce. You may have to hire an accountant to determine how much the business is worth. Was the business developed during the marriage? So the more, just like everything else in life, the more stuff you have, the harder it is to get divorced and the more expensive it is to get divorced.
What do you say to people who want to do it themselves? I mean, is it possible to do a divorce on your own?
I think it's possible for me to perform a lobotomy on myself. I don't, I don't know if I would do it. Wouldn't recommend
That's going to be the next show. I think that I'll get a bigger audience for that.
how to lobotomize yourself.
Yes.
To answer the overall question, yes, it's possible for you to do your own divorce. And given the example that I gave you, a short-term marriage, no assets, no properties, no kids, you probably could figure it out and do it on your own. But anytime you get beyond something where there's assets, there's children, things like that, it would be difficult for me to recommend someone to do it on their own when there's a lot more involved in the case.
Well, if somebody did do it on their own, can you kind of let us, what type of expenses can they expect to have to pay to the court?
Well, there's a filing fee, of course, for the initial divorce, and I believe it's around $400. And then, assuming you can't have the person accept service, then you're going to have to hire, issue a summons, have a service of process. So you're looking at about $450 right out of the gate, just in filing fees and costs. And then after that, depending on the complexity of the case, you may have to hire experts or maybe guardians ad litem, depending on the situation, which would increase the costs.
Okay. Well, again, these are things that are pretty common questions. I think that you're really honing in on, where my clients and other people have asked me where they want to go with it. But what about somebody who wants to terminate their parental rights and they don't want to pay child support? Can that be done too? We all want people to be involved in their children's lives, but some people don't want to. Is there an option to do that?
There is an option, but it's not an option that is as easy as many people think. It's not just a simple matter of just going to the court and saying, hey, I want to terminate my parental rights. This isn't like turning in a lease when you're done with it, For for you to terminate your parental rights, typically you need to find someone that's going to pick up your parental rights. So you would have to have someone adopt your child in order for you to terminate your parental rights, because otherwise, then, anyone can just have a bunch of children and then go to court and say, hey, I'm not responsible, terminate my parental rights. That's not the way it works. The state definitely doesn't want these children to become a burden for the state. And if there's a father out there, the state would prefer for the parents to raise the children financially and economically. So it's not as simple as just going to the court and saying, hey, I don't want to be dad, I don't want to be mom. For you to terminate your parental rights, you would have to find someone to take over your parental rights, generally.
What if there isn't somebody to take over? What if, like, for example, the mother and the father agree that the mother will have sole custody of the child and the father can terminate, that she consents to the father terminating the rights? Can that be done?
Well, the parties can agree to anything they want, obviously. But if there ever becomes an issue where, let's say in your example, mom says, okay, dad, you don't have to be a dad, you don't have to be involved. And mostly what the state really cares about is you being involved financially. So let's say there's a moment that mom hits a rough spot and she has to go on government assistance or Medicaid or one of those programs, then the state's going to come in immediately and say, hey, we don't care that you terminated your parental rights, dad is on the hook. As long as, you can finance yourself. I've known a couple of parties that have agreed to just say, hey, listen, walk away, I don't care. And they've agreed to it, but it isn't like, it's just an agreement amongst the parties. It isn't really something where the courts are going to say, okay, you're completely off the hook on your parental responsibilities. The court may say, hey, okay, you can afford to support yourself, fine, that's fine, we're not going to go after him. But like I said, if you get into an example where now you have to reach out for government support, financial support from the state or Medicaid, then yeah, they're going to go after that.
How often do you find yourself in court as a family law attorney?
Not a lot, actually. Some of the tougher cases where there's big assets, businesses, private businesses held, and there's a lot of discovery and a lot of requests for attorney's fees and for further inspections. But generally, family laws, for the most part, is pretty straightforward. And you really, you go to court more for issues where there's issues of domestic violence, the parents aren't getting along, dad forgot to bring the book bag, so mom now wants to file a motion for contempt. But, it's not really like your litigation that you're going in there after an insurance company and saying, hey, there's a bunch of money.
Right.
There's limited resources here. The courts know that every dollar you take away from the parents is a less dollar that goes to the kids. So there's, a lot of considerations. So courts are, we try to limit court.
For a couple that has assets, that's been married for 20, 25 years, they've decided to go through dissolution of marriage, to get divorced, what advice would you give them?
Stay together.
When you say stay together, explain why you said that.
It's cheaper to keep her. It's really a costly, traumatic event for a lot of families. It's not easy. It's tough on the children, and once you start going through very complicated accountants and going through financials, it really starts to become very difficult and, costly, mainly costly. And sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Sometimes it is.
Well, I guess I loved your answer, but what I was getting at was, if they're determined to go through it, what would you recommend they do? Because you mentioned, like, oh, somebody didn't return a book bag, they want to bring them to court.
Right.
What's the best course to take? Is it fight tooth and nail about everything, or what would you recommend to
I would always
people that obviously the emotions are flying, but how would you recommend that they deal with it?
This is one of the toughest situations because we are dealing with emotions. This isn't like a business transaction where you tell one party, well, this is going to cost you 50 grand to fight and you're going to make 10 grand. What do you want to do? There's a lot of emotions. He hurt me, she hurt me. What I try to tell my clients is, listen, you need to put those hurt feelings aside. You need to look at this almost as a business transaction. What do I have? What do I want? What is this going to cost? Because the more you fight, the more emotional it gets. And it's really hard to tell people don't be emotional, especially in this situation. It's almost impossible to tell them don't feel your feelings. But, you really have to try to put those aside and trying to center yourself to try to figure out what's the best result. Because at the end of the day, this is going to be a tough and long process, especially in a long-term marriage. If there's fighting and hurt feelings, I strongly recommend parties to try to put their feelings aside, at least for the process.
Saw an interesting article the other day. The founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, actually from Miami. He's not your client, is he?
I wish.
Well, there's no attorney-client privilege here. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
But I saw something that his divorce might actually be quicker than you think because he has so much money.
This reminds me of a Chris Rock skit, when you want to get divorced and you have $100 million and she takes half, you still have $50 million. But if you have $10,000 and she wants to take half, it's a lot tougher. So yeah, money makes everything easier, especially when you're going to walk away with billions of dollars. His lifestyle isn't really taking a hit.
No, I heard, obviously everybody knows about his wealth, but if she gets 50% of the assets of Jeff Bezos, she would probably be the richest woman in the world or close to it.
Probably, yes. He's worth quite a bit. I believe it's like over $100 billion or something.
I think they've been married for over 25 years.
Yeah, and no prenup.
No, yeah. Well, they didn't take your advice to get together.
Well, I'm sure when they got married, he was. Well, I'm sure he was poor when they got married.
Huh?
I'm sure he was poor when they got married.
Yeah. Well, I remember ordering things off of Amazon back my senior year in college.
When you can only order books?
It's amazing how that company just blew up. You never know what the next one will be. I have a really important question for you. I'm hoping you can answer it. If I'm going to the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, where's the best place for me to get a cup of Cuban coffee?
Well, thankfully, around the Miami-Dade County Courthouse, there are several places that you can get good Cuban coffee. There's a place directly across from the courthouse called Diana's Cafe. Pop in there. They have a window. They have a counter. They have tables. You get your cafecito, and you're ready to go, and it's no time at all. You'll bump into several judges, fellow attorneys, state attorneys, assistant U.S. attorneys. Everybody goes to Diana's Cafe. It's one of the places at 3:05 to get some cafecito.
Well, I know you've taken me over there, and I can vouch for it. You must stop over there if you're going.
A little unhealthy, but what isn't?
Well, yeah. If you're going to court, it's not a healthy experience to begin with.
This is true.
So why not add on to it? Now, you also do some corporate cases as well. You had one in particular. I'm not going to ask you to mention the artist or anything like that, but it involved a hat.
Yeah, we handle sometimes commercial cases, and we take contract reviews and things like that. And the example you were talking about, it was a local celebrity, I guess. And yeah, we do interesting work here sometimes.
Yes, we've had some amazing conversations.
I think I've sent you over a couple of my interesting clients.
Oh, you have, and I think we've gotten some good results and some true entertainment. And
yes,
I always say at the end of my career, at the end of your career, we can write a book with some of the more amusing successes and failures that we've all had.
That'd be great. I'll write the preface. Let me ask you a question, Jeff, since I have you
Sure.
on. What impact, if any, does a personal injury case have? Let's say a person opens a personal injury case Does that have any impact to you, to the case, if they started divorce proceedings? Has that been something you've encountered?
Actually, I've had too many encounters like that. Um, when you have a personal injury case, there's something called loss of consortium. And really, what that means is the effect on the marriage, but in one word, it means sex.
Okay.
And, a lot of times people don't want to bring that claim that the accident or the injury has affected their sex life. But that is a very real claim. It's called loss of consortium.
Okay.
I usually think the most successful ones are when you have somebody who truly has a, a disability that maybe they can't walk, or the spouse becomes a caretaker, because it's loss of love and affection,
Okay.
companionship. So it can affect those things. And in fact, every time I have a personal injury case and we settle with the adjuster asks me, is Joe Smith married?
Okay.
And I said, yes. And Jill Smith will be on the release with Joe Smith. And the reason why is the insurance company is worried that you might bring a loss of consortium claim in addition to the injury claim itself. But the truth is, if somebody is going through a divorce, what is the loss of love and affection going to be? Unless it's directly related to the accident. But I can tell you that in all the years I've been practicing, I haven't seen that. Usually there's some underlying problem. Sometimes it can be magnified by an accident or an
Right.
injury, but there's usually something there beforehand. So I don't really think that a loss of consortium claim, when somebody is either getting divorced or on the verge of a divorce, really has much value anyway. But it can present a problem when you're trying to settle the case. But thankfully, after I've had a heart to heart with the other spouse, I've been able to diffuse that situation. But I think that if it were to go forward for a hearing, I think that most judges would agree with what I'm telling you.
All right. Because I've always wondered, because I figured in your loss of consortium, once you're getting divorced, I kind of feel like that says, well, there's no loss in consortium claim anymore, I would think.
Well, I mean, there technically can be if it affects the marriage, but again, it's when you do a loss of consortium, uh, they're going to look at all of your records, including mental health records, any complaints that you had before. So if you've been in marital counseling, all of that stuff is going to come up.
Okay.
Most people don't want to talk about that in public,
Of
right?
course.
Especially in front of six strangers who are driving around in Broward or Dade County who happen to be picked for jury duty.
That's what we have Facebook for.
That's what Facebook is for. Airing your dirty laundry, Facebook. Actually, don't do that. Don't do that at all. In fact, if you have a case, whether it's personal injury or family law, maybe even like shut down your account except to watch these videos. But but really, these days, anything that you put on Facebook,
It's going to be
you
used
have to
against you.
assume that is going to be discoverable in your litigation, no matter what it is. So I tell people to be very careful. When I sign up cases, I ask them, are they on social media? I say, don't put anything on there about the accident.
I think that's also good advice when it comes to divorce. Don't put stuff on social media. Don't all of a sudden take a $25,000 vacation to Cancun and put it all on social media. You may have
Yeah.
to pay for that.
Yeah, show yourself hang gliding with your new girlfriend.
Exactly.
Or hang gliding when you have a severe back injury or anything like that.
Correct.
It's just no good can come of it. Share it with, if you have to take a picture, just share it with a close friend or something, or just show it to them on your phone.
Or just to your attorney.
Yeah, just the attorney. So, or print it out and mail it. Nobody does that.
Who does that? What's mail anyway?
Well, Frank, I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Please just tell everybody if they have any questions, if they want to reach you, Can you tell them how they can do that?
You can reach me at Howden Associates. My telephone number is 305-372-0290. My email is Franklin, FRANKLIN, at Jaralaw, JARALAW.com. Shoot me an email, give me a call. I'll be happy to answer your questions and see if we can help you out.
Sounds good. Well, again, I've known Frank a long time. He'll give you the straight answers that you're looking for, and I would highly recommend him. I appreciate all of you who tuned in or are going to watch this later. We're going to have another show on February 7th at 10 a.m. I'm going to have Eileen Maastricht on, and she is a probate lawyer, does wills and estates, and she'll be answering your questions at that time.
I may have to
So
tune in for that. I have some questions.
Well, I mean, again, all of these areas of law, I mean, we all know different ones, but they kind of intermingle at times. You need to know a little bit about each one. So I'll have some questions relating to my practice, and any other questions that anyone else has, feel free to message me, call me, 954-341-2777, or email me at jeff@edelmanlawyers.com. You can always get me on Facebook too. Again, I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me on.
Really soon.